The U.S. Defiant shuddered as it struck the outer hull of the Vorax command ship. Captain Foster gripped the mechanical controls tightly, steering the vessel along the alien hull until they reached what seemed to be an access point. "Boarding teams ready," he ordered. "Counterwave device secure." Chief Engineer Cole nodded, patting the strange apparatus Dr. Walsh had created. "Ready, Captain. Once installed, it should neutralize their disruption field for about 30 minutes. "That will have to be enough," Foster replied. "Let's move." Using cutting torches powered by simple chemical reactions, they burned through the alien hull. 20 crew members entered the Vorax ship, carrying a mix of modern firearms and ancient weapons like axes and swords. They knew that once the counterwave activated, the Vorax would still have their own weapons. They fought their way through corridors filled with surprised Vorax soldiers. The aliens had never expected a physical invasion of their command ship. "Central chamber ahead," Cole called out, checking a mechanical compass that helped them navigate by detecting the ship's power core. "That's where we need to place the device." Foster nodded grimly. Half his boarding team was already dead or wounded. Final push. Cover Cole at all costs. They charged into a vast chamber filled with organic-looking technology. Vorax commanders turned in shock as humans burst in with weapons they considered obsolete millennia ago. Cole rushed to the central power column and attached the counterwave device. Initiating now. A pulse of energy spread outward from the device. Throughout the solar system, disabled electronics flickered back to life. On Earth, Admiral Murphy watched as communication screens reactivated. "All units, this is command. Electronic systems restored. Commence Operation Thunderstrike." Across the planet, hidden energy weapons powered up. Fighters that had been grounded roared into the sky. The Tazarian ships in orbit, now fully functional again, began attacking the surprised Vorax fleet. In Chicago, Colonel Dawson grinned as her comm unit beeped to life. "All units, switch to energy weapons. Air support incoming." The humans and Tazarians drew their previously useless energy weapons and opened fire on the now confused Vorax forces. The tide of battle turned instantly. On the Vorax command ship, Foster and his remaining crew fought desperately. The counterwave had restored their advanced weapons, but the Vorax were rallying. "We've done our part," Foster shouted over the weapons fire. "Fall back to the Defiant." As they retreated, Cole remained behind to protect the device. "It needs to stay active for the full 30 minutes, Captain. Someone has to guard it." Foster hesitated, then nodded. "See you on the other side, Chief." When the Defiant detached from the Vorax ship, its engines now fully powered, only 9 of the 20 boarding team members were aboard. 3 weeks later, Admiral Ellie Murphy stood beside Grand Elder Krendak on a platform in what remained of New York City. Before them stretched a crowd of humans and Tazarians, now united by battle and sacrifice. "The Vorax fleet has retreated beyond Neptune's orbit," Murphy announced. "Our combined forces continue to push them back." Krendak stepped forward, his once frail body now stronger from weeks of physical combat. "Today we honor those who fell in our defense, especially Captain Foster and the crew of the Defiant who delivered our salvation." The counterwave device had done more than temporarily restore technology. Dr. Walsh and Drelzak had built in a virus that spread through the Vorax systems, corrupting their disruption technology permanently. From this day forward, Krendak continued, the Tazarian Alliance adopts what we now call the Dual Path Doctrine. We will never again rely solely on advanced technology for our defense. Murphy nodded in agreement, and Earth will continue to honor its traditions while embracing new advancements. Together, we'll create a force unlike any the galaxy has seen. In a training field outside the city, Joint Fleet Commander Winters watched as young human and Tazarian cadets trained together. Humans learned to use neural interfaces, while Tazarians practiced with physical weapons. A Vorax prisoner was brought to him for questioning. The alien looked at the training field in apparent confusion. "Why do you keep those ancient weapons when you have our technology now?" the Vorax asked. Winters smiled slightly. Because we remember. Remember what? That the most reliable weapon is the one you can hold in your hands when all else fails. Winters turned to face the Vorax fully. And that's something your people forgot long ago. Colonel Claire Dawson wiped sweat from her forehead as she peered through binoculars at the Vorax position. Her mixed unit of human and Tazarian fighters had been holding a defensive line outside Chicago for 18 hours now. They're bringing up more troops, she said to Master Sergeant Pete Ramirez beside her. Ramirez nodded grimly. They still don't understand what they're dealing with. They think we'll break soon. Around them, fighters rested in trenches and behind barricades. The humans cleaned their weapons and checked their supplies. The Tazarians, still awkward with physical combat, practiced their movements and adjusted their grip on unfamiliar weapons. Third wave coming, shouted a lookout. Dawson raised her arm. Archers ready. A line of fighters rose up, holding compound bows, a weapon that had seemed like a museum piece just weeks ago, but now was one of their most effective tools against the Vorax. The aliens' exoskeletons could stop some bullets, but the arrows, tipped with specially designed penetrators that Lisa Winters had created, could find the weak joints. Fire, Dawson commanded. 100 arrows arced into the sky and descended on the advancing Vorax. Many found their marks. The alien line faltered but continued forward. Rifles next, Dawson ordered. Remember your targets, joints and sensory organs only. The rifle line rose up and fired in coordinated volleys. More Vorax fell, their strange, oily blood pooling on the ground. Despite the losses, the aliens pressed forward, reaching the first line of defensive traps that Ramirez had designed. Simple pits with sharpened stakes, tripwires connected to falling weights, and other devices that required no electronics claimed more Vorax lives. They never expect physical traps, Ramirez said with grim satisfaction. They're so used to scanning for energy signatures and electronics. In orbit above Earth, Captain Foster and the crew of the U.S. Defiant approached the massive Vorax command ship. The steam engines pushed the vessel forward slowly but steadily. Without electronic signatures, they had so far avoided detection among the debris of destroyed ships. Counterwave device secure, Captain, reported Chief Engineer Cole. But we'll need to get within half a kilometer for it to work. Foster studied the strange, organic-looking alien vessel through a manual periscope. We'll ram them if we have to. Everyone clear on the mission. The crew nodded solemnly. They understood this might be a one-way trip. In what had once been the UN building in New York, the Vorax commander Kroll slammed his claw against a table in frustration, cracking the surface. How are they still fighting? He demanded of his subordinates. Their technology is disabled. The Tazarians are helpless. These humans should have surrendered by now. They fight with primitive weapons, replied his second-in-command. Tools that require no energy sources beyond their own muscles, and simple chemical reactions. Impossible, Kroll hissed. No advanced species maintains such backwards capabilities. It defies logic. Nevertheless, our casualties mount. The ground forces report ambushes using projectiles, bladed weapons, and simple traps. Our soldiers are trained to fight enemy technology, not sticks and stones. Kroll moved to the window, looking out at the partially destroyed skyline of New York. Increase the disruption field strength. Fry every electronic circuit on this planet. They cannot maintain resistance forever. Back in Chicago, Dawson received word via a messenger on horseback that similar battles were happening worldwide. Humans and their new Tazarian allies fighting with whatever worked. Bows, guns, swords, and even farming tools converted to weapons. We're holding them, Ramirez said, a note of wonder in his voice. All around the world, we're actually holding them. A young Tazarian fighter approached, her 4 arms now skilled with the spear she carried. Colonel, we've captured a Vorax officer. Before he died, he said something strange. What was that? Dawson asked. He said they've conquered 32 civilizations and we're the first who didn't forget how to fight without computers." The Tazarian looked down at her weapon. He seemed afraid. The day the Vorax main fleet arrived, the skies over Earth filled with ships that blotted out the sun. Hundreds of vessels, each larger than the biggest human aircraft carriers, positioned themselves in orbit. Captain Ryan Foster stood on the bridge of the U.S. Defiant, a destroyer that had been extensively modified over the past 2 weeks. Where once there had been only electronic controls and energy weapons, now there were mechanical backups, steam-powered emergency systems, and racks of primitive projectile weapons. "All hands ready, Captain," reported his first officer. Foster nodded grimly. "Maintain position with the fleet. Remember your training for when the disruption hits." On a different screen, he could see the Tazarian ships forming a defensive line. Beautiful and sleek, they were technological marvels, and potentially useless in the coming battle. In her lab deep beneath Princeton University, Dr. Olivia Walsh worked frantically alongside the Tazarian scientist Drulzak. They had been studying the Vorax disruption technology day and night. "The particle wave operates on a specific frequency," Walsh explained to the military officers watching via video link. "It targets any system using semiconductor technology, essentially anything with a computer chip." "Can you block it?" Admiral Murphy asked from the Fleet Command Center. "Not entirely," Walsh admitted, "but we've developed a counterwave that can temporarily neutralize its effects. The problem is, we need to deliver it directly to the center of the Vorax fleet." "A suicide mission," someone muttered off-camera. Walsh nodded solemnly. "Most likely." The screens in the command center suddenly filled with static. Then all the lights went out. "It started," Admiral Murphy said in the darkness. The disruption wave spread outward from the Vorax fleet, washing over the Earth like an invisible tide. Across the planet, electronic systems failed. Cities went dark. Communications stopped. The Tazarian ships drifted helplessly, their crews unable to control them without functioning neural interfaces. But humanity wasn't helpless. In cities and military bases, backup generators powered by simple combustion engines kicked in. Mechanical systems that had been prepared for this moment began to function. Aboard the U.S. Defiant, Foster and his crew worked by the light of chemical lamps as they switched to manual controls. The ship's newly installed steam engines began to build pressure. "Helm responding, sir," called out the navigator, pulling on mechanical levers that now controlled the ship's movements. "We have propulsion and basic maneuverability." Foster allowed himself a small smile. "Signal the other retrofitted vessels. Formation Delta." Using flags, lights, and other old-fashioned signaling methods, the human fleet began to coordinate. The Vorax, believing their disruption wave had rendered Earth defenseless, began landing operations. Thousands of dropships descended toward major cities, carrying invasion forces. But they met resistance. Artillery pieces that used no electronics fired at the descending ships. Soldiers with chemical-powered firearms took position in defensive lines. In some places, people fought with whatever was available: hunting rifles, sports equipment, even medieval weapons taken from museums. In London, Commander Winters led a mixed unit of humans and Tazarians against a Vorax landing force. The Tazarians still moved awkwardly with their physical weapons, but they fought with determination. "Hold the line," Winters shouted as waves of insect-like Vorax soldiers advanced. A young Tazarian beside him fell, blue blood seeping from a wound in his lower arm. Winters pulled him to safety behind a barricade. "How do your people fight without technology?" the alien asked weakly. "With courage," Winters replied, reloading his rifle. "And by remembering that weapons don't make warriors, warriors make weapons work." On the U.S. Defiant, Captain Foster received a message delivered by a young sailor who had rowed between ships in a small boat. It was from Dr. Walsh. "Counter-wave device ready. Need delivery to Vorax command ship." Foster read the message twice, then looked out the viewport at the massive alien vessel hanging in orbit. He knew what had to be done. "Prepare the ship for a direct approach to the Vorax flagship," he ordered. and someone find me volunteers who understand what this mission means." General Frank Daniels stood at the head of the war room table, his weathered face serious as he surveyed the group of human and Tazarian leaders. The news from Europa had reached Earth 12 hours ago, and since then, preparations for war had accelerated. "The Vorax main fleet will reach us in approximately 2 weeks," he said, pointing to the holographic display showing the solar system. "Based on the Europa attack, we know their disruption technology works exactly as feared." Ambassador Xalvor's skin had taken on a gray tinge, a sign of deep distress among his people. "Without our neural interfaces and energy weapons, we have no effective means to fight." "That's not entirely true," Daniels replied. "The Europa survivors proved that physical weapons can kill Vorax soldiers. What we need is a plan that combines our technologies with backup systems that don't rely on electronics." In a factory on the outskirts of Detroit, Lisa Winters moved between workstations where humans and Tazarians worked side by side. Lisa wasn't a soldier. She had been a weapons designer for hunting and sport shooting before first contact. Now, her expertise with mechanical weapons had suddenly become vital to Earth's defense. "The principle is simple," she explained to a group of Tazarian engineers. "This rifle fires metal projectiles using controlled chemical explosions. Gunpowder. No electronics needed, just mechanical parts." One of the Tazarians, his 4 hands moving with growing confidence over the weapon parts, looked up. "But can we improve the basic design with our knowledge?" Lisa smiled. "That's exactly what we're doing. We're creating hybrid weapons, the reliability of mechanical systems with the advanced materials and designs your people have developed." Across the room, a Tazarian elder named Tezamor carefully examined ancient texts on a digital display. Since the Europa incident, he had been searching through his people's historical archives, looking for information about how his ancestors fought before neural interfaces. "I found something," he announced. His voice drew Lisa and several others to his workstation. "These are combat manuals from over 2,000 years ago, when our people still used physical weapons." The screen showed diagrams of 4-armed Tazarians wielding various weapons, staffs, bladed weapons, projectile launchers that looked like complex bows. "Can your people still move like this?" Lisa asked. "The forms require a lot of physical training." Tesmore looked uncertain. "We have become sedentary. Our neural interfaces meant we could fight while barely moving our bodies, but we can learn again." In a repurposed sports arena in London, Commander Winters watched as human combat instructors worked with groups of Tazarians. The aliens were struggling. Centuries of reliance on neural interfaces had left them physically weak and uncoordinated, but they were trying. "They're making progress," said Sergeant Mitchell, who had become something of a hero after the Europa battle. He had been shuttled back to Earth to help train others in physical combat techniques. "Not fast enough," Winters replied. "The Vorax will be here soon." Mitchell nodded toward a group of Tazarians who were practicing with simple spears. "They're stronger than they look, and they learn quickly." One Tazarian in particular caught their attention, Velinar, the combat specialist from Europa. Where other Tazarians struggled with the weight and balance of physical weapons, she moved with growing confidence, her 4 arms working in coordination as she followed the instructor's demonstration. "She's been studying those old combat manuals," Mitchell explained. "Says her ancestors were warriors before they were technologists." Winters watched her execute a complex move with a staff, disarming her human sparring partner. Maybe there's hope after all. At a secure facility beneath the Rocky Mountains, Dr. Gonzalez and Krendak examined the recovered Vorax weapons from Europa. "Their technology is like nothing we've seen," Gonzalez said. "But it has weaknesses. The energy disruption field has limited range and duration." Krendak's 4 hands moved over the alien device. "If we understand how it works, perhaps we can shield against it. Or better yet," Gonzalez replied with a grim smile, "turn it against them." The warning came at 3:17 a.m. Earth time. The Deep Space Monitoring Station on Europa detected multiple objects entering the solar system. Their energy signatures matched the Tazarian descriptions of Vorax ships. By dawn, the joint human-Tazarian outpost on Europa was on high alert. The base housed 30 humans and 20 Tazarians, all working on integrating their defensive systems. Sergeant Owen Mitchell checked his gear one more time. Unlike the other Marines stationed at the outpost, Mitchell had insisted on keeping his old-style firearms and combat knife, despite the Tazarians' amused looks. "You really think those will be useful if the Vorax attack?" asked Velenar, the Tazarian combat specialist who had been observing Earth's military. Mitchell shrugged. "Better to have options than to be helpless." Chief Engineer Samantha Cole interrupted them. "We've got movement. 3 Vorax ships approaching Europa." Everyone rushed to their stations. The Tazarian warriors activated their neural interfaces, their eyes glazing slightly as they connected with the advanced defense systems. "They're within range," announced the base commander. "Activate shields and prepare to fire." The outpost's energy shields hummed to life. The weapon systems locked onto the approaching ships. Then everything went dark. A wave of energy unlike anything the sensors had detected washed over the outpost. Every electronic system failed instantly. The Tazarian neural weapons disconnected, leaving their operators stunned and disoriented. "What happened?" someone shouted in the darkness. "The disruption technology," Cole replied, frantically trying to restart her console. "Just like the Tazarians warned us." Mitchell's voice cut through the chaos. "They'll board us next. Everyone who can fight, follow me." Emergency lights flickered on, running on basic chemical batteries. In their dim glow, Mitchell led a group to the armory. The electronic locks had failed, but the mechanical backup worked perfectly. "Take anything that doesn't need power," he ordered, grabbing several firearms and passing them out. The Tazarians stood helplessly to the side, their 4 arms hanging limply. Without their neural interfaces, they had no idea how to fight. "What about us?" Velenar asked. Mitchell pointed to a display case in the corner. "Those are replicas of human historical weapons. They're real and functional. Grab what looks easiest to use." Velenar hesitantly took a simple metal staff, while others selected swords and axes. They barely had time to distribute the weapons before the first explosion rocked the outpost. The Vorax had arrived. They came through the breach in the outpost wall, tall, insect-like creatures with exoskeletons that gleamed like oil on water. They carried complex weapons that hummed with strange energy. The first group of humans fired their projectile weapons. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. The Vorax, expecting no resistance from a technology-dead outpost, fell back in surprise as bullets tore through their front line. Mitchell led a charge, firing until his magazine was empty, then switching to his combat knife. He slashed at a Vorax warrior, finding gaps in its exoskeleton. "Like this," he shouted to the Tazarians. "They have weak points at the joints." Velenar swung her metal staff awkwardly, but connected with a Vorax's leg joint. The creature stumbled, and another human finished it with a shotgun blast. For 20 minutes, they fought in close quarters, humans with their primitive weapons and Tazarians learning to fight physically for the first time in generations. When it was over, 15 Vorax lay dead. The humans had lost 5 of their own, and 3 Tazarians had fallen. As the survivors regrouped, Samantha Cole worked on a backup communication system, a simple radio that had been shielded from the energy pulse. "We need to warn Earth," she said, making the final connections. This was just a scouting party. Velenar looked at the primitive radio, then at the projectile weapons that had saved them all. Her hand still gripped the metal staff, now dented and stained with Vorax fluids. "I was wrong," she said quietly to Mitchell. "We were all wrong about your weapons." Mitchell checked his remaining ammunition. "The old ways work because they're simple. Simple doesn't mean weak." Agent Maria Gonzalez moved silently through the dimly lit corridor of the Tazarian embassy. As Earth's top intelligence officer, She had been granted limited access to the alien facility, but her current location was definitely off-limits. 3 months of friendly relations with the aliens had produced technological wonders, but something didn't add up. She paused at a door, attaching a small device that bypassed the security system. Inside, she found what looked like a communication center. Working quickly, she copied files from the alien computers onto her specialized device. 2 hours later, Gonzalez sat in a secure room with Commander Jack Winters, Captain Murphy, and Admiral Bennett. "They've been lying to us," Gonzalez said flatly. "The Tazarians didn't come here looking for allies. They came here hiding from something." She activated a holographic display showing translated Tazarian documents. "They call them the Vorax Collective. From what I can gather, they're a species that has conquered at least 30 advanced civilizations in the last 50 years. "And they're coming here?" Admiral Bennett asked, his face grave. "The Tazarians believe so. That's why they've been so eager to form an alliance with us. They need a place to hide." Commander Winters stood up and paced the room. He was a veteran of Earth's special forces, with scars that told stories of hard-fought battles. "Have they shared any information about these Vorax?" he asked. "Very little," Gonzalez replied. "But one thing stands out. The Vorax have some kind of technology that disrupts energy weapons and neural interfaces. That's why the Tazarians have lost every major battle against them." Winters stopped pacing. "So their perfect, reliable weapon systems aren't so reliable after all." "Exactly," Gonzalez nodded. "And instead of developing alternatives, they've just been running." Captain Murphy frowned. "We need to confront them about this." The next day, Murphy and Bennett met with Ambassador Xalvor and Krendak in a private conference room. The alien's skin had paled to a lighter blue when faced with the evidence. "We meant no deception," Xalvor said finally. "We hoped to fully integrate your people into our defense systems before sharing the threat. By having us abandon our traditional weapons and training," Bennett said sharply. "The very things that might work against these Vorax." Krendak's 4 hands made a complex gesture. "You must understand our perspective. Physical combat seems so primitive to us. We couldn't believe it would be effective against an advanced enemy. We need to know everything about the Vorax," Murphy insisted. "No more secrets." Later that evening, Commander Winters met with his Special Forces team in an underground training facility. The men and women stood at attention, a mix of the best soldiers Earth had to offer. "Starting today, we double our training with non-electronic weapons," Winters announced. "Projectile firearms, blades, bows, even spears. If it doesn't need a power source or computer to work, I want you to master it." A young soldier raised her hand. "Sir, the Tazarians are saying their energy weapons are 100 years ahead of ours. Shouldn't we be focusing on learning their technology?" "We'll do that too, Corporal," Winters replied. "But I've fought in too many battles where the fancy new tech failed at the worst possible moment. When that happens, you want something reliable in your hands." Across the room, a Tazarian observer named Vilanar watched with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. She had been assigned to report on human military capabilities, and what she was seeing contradicted everything her people believed about warfare. As the humans began training with what her people would consider museum pieces, she activated her communication device. "Military Command," she reported, "I believe we have severely underestimated the humans." 3 weeks after first contact, Dr. Alan Reeves led a group of Tazarian visitors through the Smithsonian Military History Museum in Washington. The aliens moved slowly, their 4 arms sometimes reaching out as if to touch the displays before pulling back in remembrance of the no-touching rule. "This section covers what we call the medieval period," Dr. Reeves explained, gesturing to a collection of swords, shields, and suits of armor. "Humans fought with these weapons for hundreds of years. Ambassador Xalvor studied a broadsword behind glass, and you still produce these items, not just preserve the old ones." "Yes," Reeves nodded. Sword making is both an art and a traditional skill passed down through generations. Most curious, the ambassador replied. When our species developed energy weapons, we ceased all production of physical combat tools within a single generation. Lieutenant Ben Harding, assigned as security for the tour, stepped forward. With respect, Ambassador, many of us still train with these weapons. I practice with sword, bow, and various firearms regularly. The Tazarian cultural attaché, Zivtal, turned her large eyes toward Harding. For entertainment purposes, partly, Harding admitted, but also to maintain skills our ancestors valued. There's something real about physical weapons that energy weapons don't have. Zivtal made a musical sound that the translation device couldn't interpret. The other Tazarians exchanged glances. Perhaps a demonstration, Dr. Reeves suggested. An hour later, they gathered at a military training facility outside the city. Lieutenant Harding stood on the range with several weapons laid out on a table before him. I'll start with the bow, he said, picking up a composite recurve bow. He nocked an arrow, drew back, and released in one fluid motion. The arrow struck the center of a target 50 yards away. Next, he demonstrated a bolt-action rifle, hitting targets at varying distances. Finally, he used the standard-issue plasma pistol to hit moving targets. The Tazarians watched silently, their expressions unreadable to human eyes. Would you like to try? Harding offered, holding out the bow to Zivtal. The cultural attaché hesitated before taking it awkwardly in her four hands. When she tried to draw it, the bow twisted sideways, and the arrow fell to the ground. She tried again with similar results. The physical technique is quite difficult, she said, returning the bow. Our warriors haven't used muscle power to direct weapons in over 1,000 years. Ambassador Xalvor stepped forward. Perhaps we could show you our methods. He raised his upper right arm, which wore what looked like a simple bracelet. A holographic display appeared, and with tiny finger movements, he targeted the farthest mark on the range. A barely visible pulse of energy left the bracelet and hit the target dead center, leaving a smoking hole. Our combat systems are neurally linked, he explained. The warrior thinks, and the weapon responds. Physical strength and manual dexterity are unnecessary. What happens if the neural link fails? Harding asked. The ambassador's skin rippled in what humans had learned was their equivalent of a shrug. It doesn't. The technology is perfectly reliable. Later, as humans and Tazarians shared a meal, Krendak, a Tazarian military advisor, spoke quietly to Captain Murphy. Your people's attachment to these ancient ways is unusual, he said. Most species we encounter are eager to abandon their past. Murphy sipped her water before answering. Humans believe in remembering where we came from. Sometimes the old ways have value that isn't immediately obvious. An interesting philosophy, Krendak replied. His voice lowered further. Though between us, Captain, I find it refreshing. The Alliance has perhaps become too dependent on our technology. Before Murphy could ask what he meant, Ambassador Xalvor called for attention to propose a toast to new friendships. Across the room, Dr. Reeves noticed that while most Tazarians seemed amused by human traditions, Krendak was watching Lieutenant Harding with something that looked almost like envy. The massive alien ship hung in the sky above New York, its silver hull reflecting sunlight in dazzling patterns. On the observation deck of the U.S. frontier, Captain Ellie Murphy watched through narrowed eyes. After decades of wondering if humans were alone in the universe, they finally had their answer. Captain, the Tazarian ambassador requests permission to board, said Lieutenant Kevin Rogers, his voice steady despite the historic moment. Permission granted, Murphy replied. She straightened her uniform and adjusted the ceremonial sword at her hip, a tradition for formal diplomatic meetings dating back centuries. The Tazarians had arrived 3 days ago, their fleet of sleek ships appearing suddenly at the edge of the solar system. Their technology was far beyond anything humans had developed. Their ships moved without visible propulsion. Their communication systems translated languages instantly. and their weapons, from what Earth's sensors could detect, made humanity's most advanced defenses look like children's toys. Yet here was Earth, preparing to welcome them with ceremonial swords and salutes from an honor guard carrying ceremonial rifles alongside their standard-issue plasma pistols. A soft hum filled the air as the alien delegation materialized on the deck. The lead Tazarian, Ambassador Xalvor, according to the earlier communications, stood nearly 7 feet tall with iridescent blue skin and 4 arms. His large, multifaceted eyes studied the humans with obvious curiosity. "Captain Murphy," the ambassador said, his voice melodious through the translation device. "On behalf of the Tazarian Alliance, I bring greetings to Earth." Murphy stepped forward and bowed slightly. "Ambassador, welcome aboard the U.S. frontier. Earth is honored by your presence." Admiral Gregory Bennett, who had been standing quietly behind Murphy, now joined them. The old military man cut an impressive figure in his dress uniform, rows of medals gleaming on his chest, and an antique naval saber at his side. The ambassador's eyes fixed on the admiral's sword, then shifted to the similar weapon at Murphy's hip. His head tilted in what Murphy guessed was confusion. "Forgive my curiosity," Xalvor said, gesturing toward their weapons. "Our scans show these metal implements serve no functional purpose. They appear to be based on primitive cutting tools, yet you carry them alongside energy weapons. Why do you maintain these artifacts?" Murphy exchanged glances with Bennett before answering. "These are symbols of our military traditions, Ambassador. They connect us to our history and remind us of the principles that guide our service." The ambassador blinked several times, perhaps their version of surprise. "Fascinating. Most species discard outdated technology once it no longer serves a practical purpose." One of the other Tazarians leaned forward and whispered something to Xalvor, who nodded. "Captain, we have much to discuss," the ambassador continued. "The Tazarian Alliance wishes to propose a mutually beneficial arrangement with Earth. We offer technological exchange and protection within our sphere of influence." "We appreciate your generosity," Admiral Bennett said. "Earth would be interested in such discussions." "Excellent." Xalvor's upper arms spread in what might have been their version of a smile. "Though if I may suggest, to fully benefit from Tazarian military technology, your forces might consider abandoning some of these charming but obsolete traditions. Our weapons systems are designed for beings who have evolved beyond physical combat implements." Murphy felt her back stiffen slightly, though she maintained her diplomatic smile. "We look forward to learning about your technology, Ambassador, but human military tradition is deeply important to us." Of course," Xalvor said smoothly. "Merely a suggestion. Please, show us more of your vessel." As they led the delegation through the ship, Murphy noticed how the aliens' eyes lingered on every ceremonial object, every traditional element of human military culture. They seemed simultaneously fascinated and puzzled, like anthropologists studying a lost civilization, rather than meeting potential allies. What Murphy couldn't know was that in less than 6 months, these charming but obsolete traditions would become the most important military asset in the solar system, and the key to humanity's survival.